الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. One of the things in the Quran that are forbidden is al-jidal, argumentations or disputes. As a result of each party, they try to defeat the other one with arguments. And it comes in the Quran in many different words, one of which is al-jidal or al-mira, or from al-ihtijaj وَإِذْ يَتَحَاجُّونَ فِي النَّارِ. So this is in this dunya, and the people in the hellfire, they do that to one another as a form of punishment for them. When they dispute and curse one another in the hellfire, and there's no benefit of it. This is part of the punishment to get them more regretful. And in this dunya, if a person look into the ayat of the Quran, you would find that al-jidal or argumentation is always madhmoom, condemned, except in some cases. Some had mentioned only 3 verses in the Quran that mentions al-jidal. That is mahmood, that means it's recommended or it's something that is good. Which is basically if someone is arguing to make the haqq, the truth clear. Because the haqq is always superior. As this is something that needs to be well established in the heart of everyone, because this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. No one can defeat the haqq. No one can defeat the truth whatsoever with arguments, with hujjah, with evidences. What happens is if people are ignorant about the haqq, they don't know the truth, then that might seem that as if someone had defeated the truth. It's not because they defeated the truth, is that the people of the truth, they don't know it. Otherwise, the truth is never defeated. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. The truth came and the batil, falsehood, went away. Because indeed, al-batil kana zahuqa, this is the characteristics of falsehood, that it always goes away. It diminishes, it vanishes. But the batil or the falsehood does not diminish by itself. It has to have haqq to stand in front of it. It cannot stand the truth. If the falsehood is there alone, then yantafish, comes very, very big, looks very convincing to people. And people become very deceived. And as we talked about this many times, how the Quran presented it. Like the story of Musa alayhi salam. Fir'aun is the clear batil, falsehood. And when Fir'aun is alone with his sorcerers, they deceive the people. And the batil seems to people to be, this is the truth. But once the truth came, which is Musa alayhi salam with his stick, for example, the stick of Musa alayhi salam had the truth in it, because that's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that told him, Al-qiha ya Musa. So this is a command from Allah to Musa alayhi salam to throw the stick. So this is haqq, this is truth. The sorcerers, they came with their isayya and their sticks. This is falsehood. So when Musa alayhi salam threw it, it took over all of the other sticks. The batil could not stand in front of the truth whatsoever. So that's why immediately, فَغُلِبُوا هُنَالِكَ وَانْقَلَبُوا صَغِيرٍ فَغُلِبُوا هُنَالِكَ. They were defeated. And this is, again, this is something that never fails at all times, whether the people of the truth physically are in their weakest state physically, but the truth is the strongest and the most superior, and nobody can ever defeat it. But that shows the shameful thing for the people of the truth when they don't learn it very well and they don't hold fast to it very strongly. Because it's then the problem of the people of the truth, not the people of falsehood. And the masses are deceived because the people of the truth are not holding fast to it. They're not learning it. If there's ignorance about it, or people not acting upon it, then who has the upper hand? The people of falsehood. Not that the falsehood defeats the truth whatsoever. So if the jidal, if the argument is to present the truth, this is something that is good, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أُدْعُ إِلَى سَبِيلِ رَبِّكَ بِالْحِكْمَةِ وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي أَحْسَنَ. So invite da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the path of your Lord, bil-hikmah, with wisdom and a beautiful admonition and reminder. This is the original state of a da'wah. You don't start with arguments. This is how it is. You present, and you're presenting not your reason and how smart you are, You're presenting to them the wahy from Allah, the Quran, the message of Allah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, with the different context of things and who's the one that is being invited. So this has its own etiquettes and means, of course. But وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي أَحْسَنُ. Then the next stage, if did not work, then جادلهم. That means you're trying to prove your point with al-jidal, with the arguments, but with what is best. Not بالحسنى بالتي هي أحسن. And that also requires ilm and knowledge. So this is something that is praised in the Quran. Also, the other place, وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي أَحْسَنُ. Do not argue with the people of the book except with what is best in conduct and in content also. And that has also its etiquettes that needs to be observed. And some would mention in Surah Al-Mujadala, قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا. The woman Khawla bint Tha'alaba, that she came to the Prophet ﷺ, and she was arguing with regards to her husband when he gave her the words of Zihar, forbidding her on him. So this was a valid one because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet ﷺ Quran, and it has also its rulings. Other than that, most of the time you would find al-jidal in the Quran is condemned. The disbelievers, they do that, and it's when you search of, as the ulama mentioned, what makes a person argues, especially if they're upon falsehood. Maybe they would start that because they think that this is the truth. Once the truth is presented, their evidences and their arguments is destroyed completely. And they would know that if the truth is presented. وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُمْ ظُلْمًا وَعُلُوًّا. This is how the people of Fir'aun. جَحَدُوا بِهَا, they denied the truth. وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُم, they had the yaqeen in their own selves that this is the truth. Why? ظُلْمًا وَعُلُوًّا. This is the reason why a person would argue to defend the falsehood. ظُلْمًا, injustice, wrongdoing. And عُلُوًّا, person wants to have superiority on the land. He wants to be superior. The arrogance, which is the seed of all evil. This is why Iblis was kicked out of the mercy of Allah, because of the kibr. He doesn't want to be defeated. He has followers. He doesn't want to look bad in front of his followers, or whatever reasons, many things. One of which is the ways of the fathers and the forefathers. This is something that is more stronger to the person than the truth, that he get to know that this is the truth. And so on. So, and these reasons are mentioned in the Quran in many verses. And that's why it's a very detailed subject. This is the issue of al-jidal, or the arguments in the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ, to teach the companion, especially the closest ones to them, because if we talk about al-jidal, either by the truth or by falsehood. And what's the falsehood, or what's the condemned jidal and arguments, whether it's with matters of the Deen does not need for people to argue for it. There's no arguments in the Deen. And we mentioned some of the statements of the early generations of Islam. They would put that even in the books of Aqidah, because the Deen is wahy, revelation from Allah. The Deen is not opinions of people. The Deen is wahy, revelation from Allah. So the revelation of Allah, if it's explained, someone disputed, where else are you going to go? You're going to leave the wahy? Let's put the wahy on the side, and then let's talk my reason versus your reason. This is where they forbade that, because it's supposed to be wahy. And that's why the people of ilmul kalam and the like of this, they put the wahy aside and they start talking about arguments based on words and philosophy and things like this. And this is, they lost in these matters. So, and Imam Malik rahimahullah, he has a statement in that meaning. He says, أَوَكُلَّمَا جَاءَنَا رَجُلٌ أَجْدَلْ مِنْ رَجُلٍ تَرَكْنَا سُنَّةَ النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم. Is that every time a man comes أجدل, أفعل تفضيل, that means he has more power in arguments more than someone else. So every time someone comes and he has strong argumentative skills than someone else, we would leave the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Is that how it's going to be? So jidal about what? This is wahy from Allah. Like as we mentioned last night, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the people of Bani Israel to slaughter a cow. They came they want to know who's the killer of that man that got killed. Then the verdict is slaughter a cow. This is the reason here. The reason you'll get to know it later, after you slaughter the cow and you take a part of it and you hit the one that is dead. This has nothing to do with the reason of the people, but this is the wahy from Allah. And then gave them a miraculous thing that they would never even imagine when they came in the first place to ask for a ruling or to know who's the killer. that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave life to that dead person. So they saw that with their own eyes, miraculous thing, with this cow that they slaughtered. They hid this dead body with a part of it. The dead body was given life by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that one that was killed, he spoke and he said, who's the one that killed him? Is there any more evidence that is stronger than that? That doesn't happen on the face of earth. So what else can be of that which they would never ever imagine that this is going to happen? But this is the barakah, the blessings, if someone would follow the commands of Allah without putting forward their own reason. But even with that, they saw that with their own eyes. The next verses talked about qasat qulubuhum. Their hearts became even harder afterwards. So some people that are not the word immune, but they have barriers. They block their hearts from the truth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would deviate them. The Prophet ﷺ teaching the closest ones to him, even in things that might not be like the hadith. When the Prophet ﷺ went to Ali radiallahu anhu and Fatima, his daughter and her husband, two great companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they were sleeping. He went to them at night. So he said to them, أَلَا تُصَلِّيَانِ? You're not making salah? How can you be sleeping at this time? أَلَا تُصَلِّيَانِ? So they said, and who's the one that narrating this is Ali radiallahu anhu. Later he mentioned this. So Ali radiallahu anhu, he said, يا رسول الله إنما أنفسنا بيد الله فإذا شاء أن يبعثنا بعثنا. O Messenger of Allah, our souls are in the hands of Allah. If He will subhanahu wa ta'ala to resurrect us, to make us awake, we will be awakened. So the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام did not talk back. فانصرف. He left عليه الصلاة والسلام. When I said this, he said, وَلَمْ يَرْجِعْ إِلَيَّ شَيْئًا. He did not return back with me to me any words. ثُمَّ سَمِعْتُهُ. Ali ibn Abi Talib saying, then I heard him وَهُوَ مُدْبِرٌ. While his back is to us leaving, يَضْرِبُ فَخِذَهُ. Hitting his thigh like this. And he says, quoting the verse in the Quran, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرَ شَيْءٍ جَدًا. That the human being is always the most thing argumentative. They're always arguing. Human beings are always arguing. Which is, of course, clearly stating that he did not, alayhi salatu wasalam, like the answer, even though the answer was perfectly true. And لَيْسَ فِي النَّوْمِ تَفْرِيط even, as the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. There's no tafrit, there's no carelessness or sin when a person is asleep. He's asleep. And unless he is knowing that he is going to oversleep and he intentionally leave himself like this. But the statement was correct. But just the fact that this is not the most perfect answer to such a question. It should not be like this. And we do that all the time. And when we watch ourselves, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us. If someone says anything to us, correcting us in anything, the first thing that comes in is that you defend yourself. It's an instinct, right? But and that shows that the human beings, they have this in them and they have to overpower this with the truthfulness, with the humbleness and things like this. And it can go on with arguments. People would argue in matters like this. So to be argumentative or arguments in Deen, this is forbidden. And there's a hadith, authentic hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, when it comes to al-jidal fil Quran. Jidal fil Quran kufr. For people to dispute about the Quran, this is an act of disbelief. Of course, rejecting, of course, this is a matter of disbelief. Or as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith, those who would take the two types of ayat in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the beginning of Surah Ali Imran, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that brought down to you the ayat of the Quran. Some of it is muhkamat, very clear, straightforward. The meaning of it is not ambiguous. And the other one, mutashabihat, is not that it's ambiguous. Mutashabihat, that means it can have similar meanings or different meanings. So the Prophet ﷺ, he clearly stated that فَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمْ, those who, he said that to Aisha radiallahu anha, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الَّذِينَ يُجَادِلُونَ فِيهِمْ فَهُمُ الَّذِينَ عَنَاهُمُ اللَّهِ فَاحْذَرُوهُم. If you find those who would argue يُجَادِلُونَ in what? They're not going to argue with the muhkamat because the muhkamat is very clear. They would take the mutashabihat. They would take the verses that can mean more than one thing and they take that and they start arguing and spreading maybe doubts and things like this. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, these are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant. So be warned against them. and how to explain the mutashabihat, how to understand the verses that are mutashabihat that can mean more than one thing, is in the light of al-muhkamat, and that's the end of it. So verses that can mean more than one thing to be explained by the verses that are muhkamat. And then because there's no contradiction in the book of Allah and in the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. This is when it comes to arguing with matters of deen, and that's why there's so many different verses in the Quran that talks about this is the ways of the disbelievers. They would argue with regards to the ayat of Allah. إن الذين يجادلون في آيات الله بغير سلطان أتاهم إن في صدورهم إلا كبر ما هم بالغين. That those who argue with regards to the ayat of Allah, there's nothing but arrogance in their hearts. This is why they argued, is because of the arrogance in their hearts. And these ayat of Allah are the religious ayat of Allah, because they don't argue about the air, why is it air, not water to breathe? But they would argue with the ayat of the Quran. So this is such an evil thing. If a person is not a believer, then he needs to work on himself to believe. And if he reflects upon it and he seeks guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the truth is very clear. Once he believes, then he has to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the book of Allah. So there are so many ayat like this when it comes to this matters of arguments. Very briefly, some of the things for us to learn with this matter is Laylatul Qadr, for example, which is one of the consequences of arguments. This is something that we can see. People are deprived of goodness as a result of too much arguments. As the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when he came out to them to tell them about Laylatul Qadr. The hadith of Ubadah ibn Samit radiallahu anhu, خرج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ليخبرنا بليلة القدر. The Prophet ﷺ was coming out to inform them about Laylatul Qadr. Which night is it? فتلاحى رجلان من المسلمين. Two men of the Muslimin, they start arguing with one another. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, خرجت لأخبركم بليلة القدر. I came out to inform you about Laylatul Qadr. فتلاحى فلان وفلان. So and so and so and so they start arguing with one another. فرفعت. It was lifted away from me. And he says, وعسى أن يكون خيرا. He says, and maybe this is good for you. Why good for you? Because you'll make more ibadah that way. Right? So you're gonna, instead of just one night and that's the end of it, it's good for you because you make ibadah in the 10 nights, for example, and you will get Laylatul Qadr, inshallah ta'ala, and the reward of the rest of also of the nights. Then he said, فَالْتَمِسُوهَا فِي التَّاسِعَةِ وَالسَّابِعَةِ وَالْخَامِسَةِ. Seek it in these nights and so on. So, but at the same time, you see that at-talahi, or the arguments, cause this. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decree also for the people to learn. And that's why there's another hadith which is a very hadith that brings the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hearts, where the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said, ما ترك قوم هدى كانوا ما ضل قوم كانوا على هدى أو كانوا ما ضل قوم على هدى كانوا عليه إلا أوتوا الجدل أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. That there's no group of people that deviated away from guidance that they were upon unless they will be given al-jadal. They will be given argumentations. So this is a form of punishment from Allah. When you find the Muslimin, for example, just busy with arguing with one another. The argumentations is their day and night job. Then you know that this is a punishment. Why? That means they were guided and they deviated away from guidance. But that's everybody will say, but I'm defending the truth. If you're defending the truth, mashallah. But there's a limit to defend the truth. And that's why the early generations of Islam forbade argumentations when it comes to the truth. You presented, if someone said something, you presented with the wahi, with the revelation of Allah, you make it clear. And that's the end of it. That you don't continue with these types of arguments. And this is basically what they meant by that. Imam Malik rahimahullah, he says, Al-mira'u fil ilmi yuqassi al-qulub wa yurithu ad-daga'in. To be argumentation in knowledge makes the hearts hard, and it makes people have enmity in the hearts towards one another. But again, this is not to be passive or to stay, let the falsehood to continue or to spread, but to express and to, if people, they need even more time, and there's sometimes debates are very healthy. But this is something to be in the context of ilm and to ask before we just allow ourselves to do whatever we want based on one's desire. And the Prophet ﷺ, as we heard that hadith, and man taraka, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, this is also matters of dunya, people arguing with things of of worldly matters. ما ترك أو من ترك الجدال. أنا آه، زعيم بيت في ربض الجنة لمن ترك الجدال وهو محق. Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام said that I guarantee a house in the outskirts of Medina for the one that of Medina Jannah. Medina, inshallah. May Allah make us go to Medina, inshallah. Outside the skirts and Jannah, inshallah. In Jannah, for those who would leave arguments while they are muhiq, when he's on the right, he has the right opinion, but he left arguments. He presented his point, is not accepted, so then it becomes one's self that he's trying to defend. So to leave the argument, even if you are right, after the matter became clear, that means it's waste afterwards. It's just people fighting with each other, exchanging words, and it's all about defending oneself. And that's why a person has to also be extremely careful. Is it the deen of Allah? Is it the haqq that the person is defending, or his own image and his own egos and things like this? Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he was mulham, inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, هل تعرف ما يهدم الإسلام? He said to one of the people, Ziyad, did you know what destroys the deen of Islam in the life of the people? He said, no. He said, زلة عالم, the mistake of a scholar. And when people take the mistakes of the scholars, then this is they turn away from the deen one piece after the other. Especially if someone, his job is to look for the weaker opinions that fits the desires in every alim. You leave the entire ilm, the knowledge of that alim, and you take the zalla, the mistake that he has, and from the other one, his mistake. So then all of the evil becomes in one person. وَجِدَالُ الْمُنَافِقِ بِالْكِتَابِ, and the argument of the hypocrite with the book, with the Quran. That's why if a person wants to know the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, those who would argue with the verses of the Quran to prove that the deen of Allah is this or that, or for people to do sin instead of doing a good deed, things like this. جِدَالُ الْمُنَافِقِ بِالْكِتَابِ, by the book. وَحُكْمِ الْأَئِمَّةِ الْمُضِلِّينَ, and the ruling of the deviant rulers or leaders. They would deviate people with them. Maymun ibn Mihran, and we mentioned Maymun ibn Mihran more than one time, the one that he said that إذا صلح أهل القرآن صلح الناس. If the people of the Quran are upright and righteous, the people will be upright and righteous. Because then it's the responsibility of the people of the Quran to be upon the truth and to hold firm to it and to show it, not to show off. If people see someone applying the truth, this is one of the most important and effective way for people to accept the truth. Not that the information is out there. But when the people of the Quran themselves are pleasing the people, they don't want the people to run away, and they think that this is the way of da'wah. The way of da'wah is for not for people to be pleased with the one that is given da'wah. This is not the objective of the da'wah. The da'wah is to convey the truth in the most lenient and pleasant and good way. That's it. In alayka illa al-balagh, with one's conduct and speech, not just speech, and good manners and things like this. But the whole people are running away from the deen, so let's compromise this, and let's compromise this. Then is it calling to the deen or is it calling to something else? So he, rahimahullah, he says, he was saying that to some of his students. إياكم الخصومة والجدال في الدين. Be warned against dispute and arguments in matters of deen. ولا تجادلن عالما ولا جاهلا. Do not argue with a alim or an ignorant one. أما العالم, if it's a person of knowledge, he would not be able to give you his knowledge. It's not that he will be greedy with his knowledge, but this is a human nature, right? Someone that is always argumentative. You want what's from the alim, from the scholar. So if you keep on arguing with him, that's different than trying to learn. That's a different thing. ولا يبالي ما صنعت, and he's not going to be harmed with what you do. You're the one that would lose. وأما الجاهل, and as for the ignorant one, فإنه يخشن بصدرك. That means he will make your heart hard. ولا يطيعك, and he's not going to obey you because he's ignorant anyway. So that means the argument is not going to go anywhere. But again, this is not the way that a person, if he feels and he sees that there's goodness comes as a result of presenting something. And ومن جعل دينه غرضا للخصومات كثر تنقله. This is Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, when he was a Khalifa, he sent it to the people of Al-Madinah. He says, من تعبد بغير علم كان ما يفسد أكثر مما يصلح. Whoever worships Allah without knowledge, he will corrupt more than making things upright. In good intentions is not enough unless it's with the proper knowledge. ومن عد كلامه من عمله قل كلامه إلا فيما يعنيه. And whoever counts his speech from his amal, from his actions, he would speak less, and he would turn away from speaking about the matters that is of no concern to him. And then here's the point: ومن جعل دينه غرضا للخصومات. Whoever makes his religion presented to the arguments, as if you put your religion in the midst of the arguments. What happened? كثر تنقله. He will keep on moving. Few times, sometime with these people, and then with the arguments, someone defeated him, he goes somewhere else, he becomes something else, and he keeps on moving like this. And the deen does not, this is not permissible, the deen. But if it's something that is not deen, that's a different situation. And the deen is nothing but the wahy again. The revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's so many nusus and so many things from the people of knowledge, and to check and to purify the heart so that the person is sincerely, truly want to have the truth and to be upon the truth. Therefore, with matters of deen is to learn the deen and to be like the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. They would learn to act and they would not need to argue whatsoever. And if someone wants for the truth to be presented, yes, can be done. And if someone asks, then an answer can be done. And in certain situations, the al-jidal bil-haq, to argue with matters of the truth, yes, this is valid, but a person requires for him to have the knowledge of it and not to deceive oneself with regards to this. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those their hearts are protected and to make us steadfast upon the deen of Allah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم.